So welcome once again. We're going to have our community conversation here, and let me spotlight my video for you. We'll start with a short practice time together. It's a nice way to come into the zone of our conversation. So please take a comfortable seat. I just came in from the outdoors, so whatever your activity had been, you can lay that aside, accepting the beneficial influence of the activity and setting aside whatever would be non-beneficial. And then allow your breathing to help you to arrive. In this arriving process, what you might consider is on the inhale, like an invitation to be here in your most vital self, even if it's like a little flicker of vitality. And on the exhale, invite yourself to sort of slough off what is maybe the residue or the dust bunnies. And with that inhale and exhale process, let it be at your own rhythm. Now, for each time that you breathe in, you can start making the breath a little bit longer. And imagine it starting at the base of the spine and coming up a little bit higher. So the inhale might at first just be kind of shallow, maybe below the belly button. But then the in-breath can come up more and more, up towards the solar plexus and even eventually up to the heart. And that might have to be a gradual process because sometimes we've been away from deep breathing for several hours or days, or sometimes for weeks or months. And with the exhalation, let that also start at the base of the spine. And it just gradually tones the low belly, the mid-low belly, the navel center, the solar plexus. And we do that also with an attitude of sort of gentleness and appreciation for the breath itself. And start noticing if there might be like a little pause at the top of the inhale, however deep it is, and a little pause at the bottom of the exhale, however complete that might be. And then to support this process, I'd like you to clasp the hands, push the heels of the hands forward, and then raise up with your inhale. And when you exhale, press the arms forward, round your spine, draw the lower belly in and broaden the back of your body. That's a full exhale there. And then inhale, raise up with your spine, your heart, your throat, lift your gaze, look up at your hands. And then exhale and push forward, round your spine. Even press forward through the heels of the hands. And once more, inhale to raise up. Open the whole spine, chest, heart, throat, and your gaze. And this time, exhale and push out to the sides of the room. Squeeze the upper back for a moment, and then rest your hands back in your lap. And noticing how even just a few moments of mindful breathing and moving shifts your attention or your sense of connection with yourself. And when you have the readiness to do so, you can open your eyes and we'll join up here in our Zoom room. Gratitude to see you. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the concept of the treadmill of the mind and the treadmill in the mind or at the gym. But I also would really enjoy any questions that you have or experiences you'd like to be sharing. And you can start with questions in the chat if you want to, and you can chat directly just to me or to the group, or of course you can unmute and ask a question also at any time. So the reason I titled this talk, this discussion, this time to be together, is the treadmill in your mind or at the gym. I titled it this way because as we come into certain seasons of the year, we get a lot more marketing for certain kinds of activities related to this fitness industry, beauty industry, diet industry, the mentality that we have to fix our bodies, that we have to fix them according to some standard outside of us that we see in fashion, beauty, health, and so on. All those endorsements and propaganda really is out there. So there are different seasons of the year where this is going to come around even more, like your inbox or your social media feed or what you're seeing on the magazines is going to be more about a certain diet, a certain activity, a certain exercise. And so the treadmill is referring to this kind of exercise zest that comes over us in the spring, because we're going to sort of work off the winter body and finally get the spring or summer body that we're supposed to have, that we're meant to have. And that mentality, by the way, that you can just transfer that throughout the calendar year, the way that the marketing industry is doing that. You can transfer it to the holidays or the birthday or going back to school or getting out of school or family gatherings or Valentine's Day or Easter or anything. And it's Easter weekend this weekend. So this mentality is basically cycling through the year, and the industries that take over our minds are using that mentality, and they do kind of update it a little bit, and they know where we're more vulnerable or more susceptible, and they are able to snag that and then to use that to pull us back in. So one of the first treadmills to look at is the treadmill of the marketing situation, the cycle, the annual cycle. And for me, one of the ways that I like to interrupt my thought process or to help others interrupt theirs is to ask the question, do I want that industry to own me? Do I want them to own me? Do I want that mentality to own me? Do I want that mentality? Or what does that mentality really want of me? What is it really promising me? And is that the method to get there? Is that the pathway to get there? And has that worked consistently, effectively, and with longevity? Because that's the other thing about it, is that if it worked consistently, effectively, and with longevity, they wouldn't keep being able to sell it to us. So let's keep that kind of backdrop in mind. And let's also consider that we came into this susceptibility or vulnerability to this background noise backdrop of marketing and media. We came into it because we had existing sensitivities or vulnerabilities. And so the treadmill in the mind, that one that's ours, like a little hamster on a little wheel in there that never sleeps and doesn't really stop, that has root causes. And those root causes precede our awareness of the beauty industry, the fitness industry, the diet industry. It precedes that. And the root cause, as I like to say in Hunger, Hope, and Healing, is actually shame, this internalized shame. When that shame is internalized, we then have this ever-present undercurrent of anxiety. And that anxiety is what the hamster is running on in that wheel in our heads. So that internalization of our sense of self-worth as unworthy, or our sense of personhood as broken or flawed or irredeemable, that internalization of shame creates this undercurrent of anxiety and angst that is always there. And if you look at the hamster running on the wheel, they never go anywhere, actually. And sometimes you see they have these treats that the dog or the cat or the mouse are chasing for to get the treat, like they're going to finally get the treat, they're going to get it, they're going to get the reward. They're finally going to get that reward. And what's happened is we have this anxiety. We look for what's going to make that anxiety feel less painful. And a lot of what we discover in early life is that things like food and TV and isolating and reading, imaginary friends, getting lost in food and projects, or hoarding food, storing food in your room, making sure you have access to the food that's going to be soothing. Those are behaviors that we've reached for to soothe. And then that soothing, it seems like the lifespan shortens. Like we aren't soothed for that long. For example, we might have one episode in early life, we go, oh, that was so soothing. I felt, and we don't say it consciously to ourselves, that we're like, oh, I really calmed down. When I did that thing with the ice cream and the toast and the TV, I just felt a lot more calm, which was probably actually sedated. And maybe that happens one day after school. And then maybe it happens one day on the weekend. And then maybe it happens every day after school. And it starts to happen every day on the weekend. And then it's something that we're doing all the time. And the cycle of soothing is getting abbreviated. It's shortening. So the sedating or the calming is lasting less long, and the anxiety is actually still there. We haven't actually solved the root cause of it, because in our earliest life, I'm sorry to say this, I don't mean it to be doom and gloom, but we can't solve it on our own. If we could, we would have done so. So we can't solve it on our own in our earliest life, and we also really can't solve it on our own in our adult life, because we're interpersonal creatures, and we are nourished by, even dependent upon, the connection we can have with others that forges the pathway of healing. But let's go back to this thing in your earlier life when you're using this behavior and it starts to have a shorter lifespan. It's not soothing for as long, and the anxiety is still there. And then we're going to add to that, our hormones start coming on, and our limbic brain is growing faster than our neocortex. Now we're having the hormones of adolescence, and we're having the surge of this brain, and maybe some of those behaviors of food actually start turning into things like sports, athleticism, certain kinds of exercise. We want to add that because now we're aware of our body's shape and composition, and we're told that we should look a certain way. In fact, when I was a child, it was like the Dolly Parton physique was the one we're going to go for. And I was like, well, that is never going to happen here. There's no design like that in my genetics whatsoever. But then they had these other ratios that they would give you, and you were going to measure yourself to see if you had the ratio. And the ratio included certain things. And in our culture, one of those really important things, I don't know where other cultures are, how many other cultures on the planet have this, but really super important, you're going to have a flat stomach. Okay. Second really important thing was, thank you, Lynn. Yeah. The second really important thing was that your inner thighs should not touch. Okay. Well, in both cases, I was going to have some possible dilemmas because I didn't know what to do to make either one of those things possible. But what the message I got was, and maybe you got this message also, I should be able to control it. The flat stomach and the size of the thighs and every other thing. And in fact, somehow I thought you should be able to control the size of your breasts and the size of your hips, everything about it. I never thought I was going to control my height, that I was going to somehow be able to generate more height or less height. I'm a short person. I'm only 5'1". And I never had this impression that I was going to have to change that was somehow problematic, but every other message that was coming through was there. Like when I was a child, I thought I had too much hair on my arms because I have dark hair and I thought it was too much. You shouldn't have that hair on. You look like your grandfather, people would say. Oh, even that's wrong, right? So in this internalization of shame, and we start doing things that soothe that shame, at first it may not actually be about our bodies. It might be that nothing has explicitly been said to us about our physical body, but it could be that in the environment, there is enough anxiety, chaos, angst of some kind. There are things that we can't solve. We're children. We don't understand the dilemmas of the larger family or the parents. So we start reaching for food, or we're given food to manage our emotions. And that begins to change our blood sugar levels, our insulin, it changes our body composition and our hormones. And then we might start hearing some comments about our body. And they could or could not be based on reality. I mean, it could be that the parents fear their own body shape or composition, so they are terrified for their child and they say things that are really unhelpful. Or it could be that the child is not at all in any risk of becoming overweight or not having a healthy physique, but the parents are concerned that the child would look like a model or would look like this other athlete. I wonder what happened in the 2008 Olympics when those two volleyball players were out there in their bikinis looking so slim and so amazing and winning all these matches, and they were all over international TV. I wonder how many parents thought if their daughters just looked like that, somehow that was going to be successful, right? So it doesn't have to be correlated with our actual body composition. It can be the fear in the parents, or it can be what's happening in society. I recall really, really, really needing to have the Dorothy Hamill haircut for myself. I had to have that haircut. And I remember also I was a gymnast, and it wasn't going to be a good idea to look just like this particular famous gymnast. I'm going to forget her name right now. She was short with dark hair, and she was really strong. And at my age, she was comparable to me. And so you shouldn't look like that, because though she's amazing, she has thunder thighs. And so all these ways in which it gets slipped into our dialogues are there. Then, as I was saying, we come into adolescence and we start feeling like we're going to be able to control this, or that we should control it. We have emotions that feel like they're quote unquote out of control. They're just emotions that are bigger from the limbic brain than the neocortex. And we're not getting the help we need to understand that. So we can feel in certain environments that, in fact, my emotions are too big because this container is too small for emotions. This container, this particular family system might be too small for the emotions. Maybe the water in the pool is really shallow, so every emotion looks like a big splash. Whereas if the pool was filled with water, like love and nourishment and kindness and emotional intelligence, the splashes would just be absorbed by the water and they would be understood by the other swimmers. So in that case, there we are in adolescence, learning a few things about how we're supposed to be. And a lot of us then learn to pound the pavement, go to the gym, get on the Stairmaster. I talked about the Stairmaster yesterday when I was up at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. I was broadcasting from there. We're going to get this all like burned up in the calories at the gym. And we're going to be ferocious about it. We're going to get to weigh ourselves. There's going to be now weights to lift. In the last couple of decades, there's more of that for women. There's these classes to take. There's a boot camp to be a part of. There's like crunches upon crunches upon crunches. And all of that in the exercise, how shall I say, fanaticism. What we have seen is that if you look at the health spectrum side by side, becoming fanatical about exercise hasn't produced greater health, because it's the attitude inside the exercise. In fact, sometimes it's produced injuries, or it's produced inflammation in the body, or a sense of competition, or, because your limbic brain is there and you're doing all this activity that looks a lot like fight and flight, this part of the nervous system. So we're lifting the weights, we're pushing on the things, we're pushing with the legs, we're doing what can work out the fight or flight biochemistry, but we're also in it. We're in a kind of soup like that. So in some cases, what's being generated is inflammation, joint pain, injury, and so on, and an attitude about our bodies that we keep kind of like inspecting. We're looking so closely. We're doing the what do they call that? Like you're really assessing. There's a certain word for it. It's kind of like being at a dog show, and they're really looking really close at the perfection of something. So you see like this little patch of cellulite on your leg, and you're like losing it, right? So is the treadmill actually in the mind or in the gym, or is it in both places? And how is this treadmill then serving us or not? It is recommended, highly recommended, to exercise and have a healthy physical life with our bodies. To walk in nature is one of the most recommended exercise forms for depression, anxiety, and lower back pain. To go for a walk in nature. Not to pound the pavement running in a city zone, trying to get your calories burned. But if somebody is really designed for something like cycling, hiking, swimming, running, and like I'm not designed for running, I never was, unless I was chasing a field hockey ball or going over the hurdles, which was great, or running the 4x4 relay. I loved that kind of running, but I was never designed to go for a run to burn calories. I don't have the right stride for that. I don't have the right mechanics for it, but I really enjoy cycling and hiking. And I was a very competent swimmer, but it's not my preferred exercise because of the complication of going there, getting wet, having to shower again, having to dry off. The whole thing is a little bit complex, and finding a swimming pool in a city to go to that isn't super chlorinated is really hard. But having healthy activity, exercise, nourishment, moving your body, especially in nature, with an awareness of the nourishment, the love, the kindness that is for our mental health and our physical health, that does nourish your basic body composition, your particular physique back to health. So like yoga, mindful stretching, hiking in a way that's not like you're competing with somebody else, those activities are recommended. Having an appropriate amount of strength training is really helpful for us as women also to have a sense that there's a cohesive, strong, courageous self who's in here, and that we do have the musculoskeletal stamina that we would need for certain activities in our lives. But addressing the shame that pushes us to exercise, that is so key. To address when it's a shame-based effort to exercise. It's because of the shame that we're out there doing something. That we really do want to address the shame about. And also look for places to go to exercise with a group perhaps, where there isn't a sense that your shame is going to get activated. That you're not comparing yourself or competing and so on. So let me pause there and see what questions or comments you guys have, and anything that I'm stimulating. Yeah, so you wrote in the chat, if you don't stop eating so much, you're going to end up looking like your Aunt Mary, and you wouldn't want to look like her. Is that right? That would be really bad thing if you looked like Aunt Mary. Right. Yes, mine was Aunt Bertha. Then there was Aunt Gertrude. We had these names. We thought those names were also kind of like, I'm glad I'm not Bertha. I'm glad I'm not Gertrude. They seemed like strange names to us as children because none of our friends had those kinds of names. But yeah, that kind of messaging is there. Right. So what else is generated as you hear me talking about this? What is it? In fact, how is your body responding to what you're hearing me say? And you are welcome to unmute and just speak if you'd like to. You also can use the chat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes to everything. And I have this stuff totally embedded in my system from, my first diet was when I was in a freshman in high school, and I was very athletic, and so the boys called me Thunder Thighs because, like, I think now, like, Serena Williams, her body is amazing, and mine was similar. I mean, it wasn't exactly like hers, but I mean, I have a similar kind of physique, and I was strong, and yet I was called Thunder Thighs for this. So, and so there was constant shame. And then the comment I made about what my mother would say, and it's just so there. And so that, yes, you get on this, like you've talked about in the past also, is like, okay, it's spring, summer's coming, we're going to be more exposed, we'll be wearing less clothes. And so we better get back on it. And as you know, me from Hunger, Hope, and Healing is, I was heavily into CrossFit. And I love what you just said, and it relates. It's, I was driving myself from having to fit a particular mold of what I should look like versus it was a mix. I wanted to be fit, but there was also that shame piece driving it. So yes.
Yeah, always the enticement for the reward, right? And there's a whole mentality that's involved in that even at the gym, the people who work there may not know that that's happening. They might not be aware of that going on, because it's like fish swimming in the ocean. The fish don't think of the word water. So in those settings, we don't think of the mentality that's driving the center there.
Yes, and as you know, I've stepped away from CrossFit so I can find a more nourishing way of moving and taking care of myself. I mean, the people at the gym, they don't get it, and they keep wanting me to come back, and because that driven mentality is just, you're right, it's the water they swim in. And I can feel myself being pulled, like, oh, that is the water to swim in, but I know that there's another way thanks to your work.
Right. So one of the things about shame, and I think maybe this happens in the fitness industry, you can confirm for me because I've not been a part of it for decades, but with shame, we have this deep desire to get control over it. And it just occurred to me how in things like seeing how many calories you're burning on the machine, seeing how far you went, seeing your heart rate, seeing the things that you can see as all that data is coming back at you, and then counting the calories and then watching the scale and getting the micrograms of nutrients, this and that, that a lot of that feels like it could give us the internal structure of control or assurance. And so if we want to solve for shame and we want to do these things that feel like it's going to solve for that, those are all external biofeedback data to us. And we are dependent upon external feedback from our earliest life. But when we get to a certain age, we want to be able to rely upon internal feedback. So external feedback, we are very susceptible to, in fact, completely dependent upon from the time that we're born. But then we grow into our internal feedback system. And yoga teaches us that so beautifully, because you can feel the pace of your breath, you can sense the quietude of the mind, you can sense yourself coming back home. So sensing if we have peace or tranquility amidst the exercise, that would be internal biofeedback rather than this external measure. And somehow what you were saying there about how the attitude at the gym, you kind of still feel sometimes tempted by it. Like our shame part may want the structure that seems to provide, or the control that we think we're going to get from that, the assurance, the mathematical assurance that we're going to get from that. Does that ring true for you? Does that sound like part of your
Yes,
thinking?
yes, absolutely. And you mentioning about the external feedback, I mean, and I think what you were saying earlier as well is like when we have this shame and we develop it at a young age, I mean, for myself, I see other people being successful doing that stuff. And so I think they have the answer, just like the diet industry, you know, they have the answer. And so to come and like for me, I haven't had a strong sense of the internal feedback, you know, or internal connection even for a long time. So I just went out in search of it. So like I've said, through Hunger, Hope, and Healing, I'm learning that there is a lot on board here that I can listen to if I listen.
Yeah. Yes. That there's a lot inside that you can hear if you're listening for it. It's in
Right.
there. Yeah. Yes. So that's an interesting observation as well, that in some cases, the physique that is sought after is attained by certain people at the gym by this particular kind of fitness practice that they're doing. And perhaps for a percentage of those people, that physique then remains, and they also have mental equanimity and inner peace and compassion and flexibility and generosity and all the heart qualities that they want to have in their life. I don't know, because I haven't done any research on that. But a question that comes up is, how could one sort of plan or one particular process be suited to all of the different physiques that we are, since there are so many different body types? In Ayurveda, we say there are 3 primary doshas, and 3 times 3 is 9. So there's at least 9 different body types there, depending on what our particular dosha is. So how are we going to find the pathway that is ours? If we can re-regulate the systems that get disrupted by shame, like endocrine and nervous system, digestion and immune systems, if we can re-regulate those systems back to health and homeostasis, we will hear and discover what our health set point is, what our basic set point for our metabolic composition is. We're going to know that from being in alignment with our body's intelligence. So long as we're out of alignment in those systems, we're probably not going to know our home ground. It's going to feel like it should look like that photograph or the other person for whom that process was successful.
Yes, and all of that created us to not know ourselves, you know, it's a vicious cycle.
Yes. If we knew ourselves, we wouldn't be such good consumers of the media and the products and the plans.
Right.
We wouldn't be such good customers for those people. So
yes,
they don't want us to know ourselves very well. Yeah.
I have a dog to get, excuse me.
Yes, I understand how that can be. I have a couple kittens swirling at my ankles. Yeah. So anything else that's coming that's sort of getting percolated by what you're hearing us talk about, you're welcome to either put it in the chat, or you can unmute and let us know if you have any questions or anecdotes to share also. And I will say that I think health can be brought about by healthy exercise, healthy movement, and also looking at eating healthy foods, particular foods that actually nourish your brain and your body. I know that there are thought cultures out there that say there are no good foods and no bad foods, and I agree with that. There's no inherently good or bad food regime that we want to be looking at. However, there are foods that are chemically altered, chemically produced to generate more craving from us. So for example, in the fast food industry, there are things done to the food that perpetuate craving for more of that same food. So that's not a natural food. It didn't come from the ground or from nature. It's been man-made and kind of commodified. And it's been produced to produce more craving, not to produce satiation and nourishment. So if we think of inherently, there's no good food or bad food. There's no right or wrong food. Like at an inherent level, we don't want to have judgment about which foods, like evil foods and safe foods. That is one of the mentalities that can come when you have an eating disorder or a disordered relationship to food and eating. And so we want to soften that sense of the polarization about good and bad, or evil or safe foods, and come into a relationship with food that is like, is this creating health or is it burdening my health? And certain kinds of foods are a burden to our health. So if we want to have a relationship that's healthy exercise, we also want a relationship with healthy nourishment. So it does not need to be strict nor stringent, nor like in orthorexia, profoundly, meticulously curated, but it can be healthy enough. And if we just say, can I take out the foods that are disrupting my hormones? Can I take those ones out? Like MSG is a hormone disruptor. Can I take out the foods that disrupt my hormones, or those that disrupt my digestion? Can I take out the foods that are actually chemicals rather than eating the food itself? Can I find the whole food version of the thing that I'm eating? That's a question for us to be asking at a deeper level than just good food, bad food. It's like ethical food or non-ethical food. It's not ethical to have food be distorted and created in order for us to crave it more and more, right? And in some cases, it's also important for us to be asking, in terms of ethical or non-ethical food, where was the food grown and how? And do I want to be eating that? Do I want to be taking that in? So our body composition is going to be able to come back to its healthy set point. First thing is resolving that how shame has disrupted our endocrine system, our digestive system, our nervous system, our thoughts, our self-perception, our self-worth, all of that. The second two pieces there are healthy enough exercise and healthy enough food with strong digestion. Now, each of these is going to also intersect with your sleep. Like, when are you sleeping? That is very important for what it does to your digestion. And exercise helps you to set your sleep rhythm to be more optimal. So they're all tied in together there in terms of the daily cycle of these things that bring our health about. And in recovery, we get to ask the deeper questions about what is truly a nourishing form of exercise for me? And what do I really want to be eating when I'm eating? I mean, I want to be eating these certain healthy foods. Where was it grown? Do I want to be eating the sort of labor of those workers? Were they fairly treated? Is that something that I want to be thinking about at this point in my healthy journey to wholeness and healing? I recommend those kinds of questions, but sometimes they're a little bit deep diving for the first phase of recovery. We just want to be in a lot less pain. We just want to get clear and sane, and we can't yet handle the other questions. So we let those come in time to look at those questions when we're ready to. Anything that I'm percolating there? Is it thought-provoking? I think that you can assure other people when you, Lynn, that if they hang out with me, it's going to be thought-provoking. There's going to be more than just a simple conversation.
Yes, there's plenty for sure. And most appreciated too. It's such a gift to have these different perspectives that you bring. Then than the mainstream perspectives, and it's a healing perspective, and I think that's what so many of us are longing for, is to get off the treadmill of dieting, exercising, etc. And you offer that, so I appreciate that.
Right. That's what I said a few minutes back, like earlier on, like, do I want this industry to own me? Do I want them to own me and my thoughts and my mentality? I don't want that industry to own me. If we look at how much money the industries are making, I don't want to contribute to that. A lot of that money could be repurposed for climate mitigation and food sustainability and childhood education and trauma
Oh,
healing.
yes.
It could be repurposed. Right?
Yes.
So I don't want those industries to own me. I don't want them to own you either, any of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly have. It's just been so pervasive, and
Yes.
it's just so accepted.
It becomes so normalized.
Yeah.
And one of the things we do in recovery is we come to see that we were susceptible because of an internal set of circumstances that were once an external set of circumstances. We were susceptible. We can come to that with forgiveness. We don't have to blame ourselves or shame ourselves for having been susceptible. We didn't create that deeper susceptibility. It was co-created in us by our earliest care providing environments.
Mhm.
And then we can also thank ourselves for having the courage to try a new perspective, like being here. And sometimes I even recommend, sometimes we'll be able to thank the pain that we've been in for telling us that that wasn't going to be the right fit, that we don't want to do that for the rest of our lives. Is it just burning my calories and trying to get my micronutrients organized? There's more to life than that, right?
Yes.
So.
Yes, the thought of, I mean, when I was at CrossFit, I mean, the big thing was counting macros, and it's like, do I really want to spend the rest of my life knowing my macros? It's like, I don't want to spend my energy that way. And yet I did, because I thought that was the way to get control over this body.
Yes, which you learned you should have control over it. And by the way, we have to have another session on this one, because you're a woman. You should have control over that body, because men can't control themselves about your body, or you should have control over your body because it's kind of messy every month, or you should have control over your body because it really shouldn't have dimples or wrinkles or places where it's sagging or anything. You should have control over that because it would benefit our society somehow. And your
Yes,
emotions, by the way, don't let your emotions get too big, because you know how women are with their emotions.
right. And we're constantly judged. I mean, we judge ourselves, but there's so much judgment coming at you if you're not, because you obviously you can't control yourself if you're overweight. Obviously you're a sloth or whatever, and it's so much more complex than that.
Right. And one of the really painful things, and if we look at that original self-soothing behavior of like reaching for food, is that there is a certain place in that cycle where that whole process has more control over us than we do over it. And so we
Mhm.
tell ourselves that we're out of control, that we don't know how to control ourselves. We're now reinforcing a very painful message, because that food thing, I call the food werewolf sometimes, it does become more powerful than we are. And that's because our brain is tied into the soothing and the biochemistry of the foods that we usually binge on. I didn't really binge on broccoli that much, if you want to know. I was binging on other things. And I was crazy for those things. And then when I was going to restrict them, like heavily restrict them and make sure I got all my exercise, all I wanted was those things. I mean, the craving, I could feel the texture on my tongue while I was starving myself. I wanted the thing so bad, like that. Yeah. So it's a cycle that then tells us, that's right, you don't have control over yourself. You can't get this under control, which gives us deep messages of failing. And fortunately, it's all really not true. But until we know that it's not true, it's very painful.
Yes. So I think realizing that there are good reasons why we have, I mean, good meaning like we came about this not because we, have some inherent flaw, but because of all kind of the environment that has caused us to, take on our food behaviors, our dieting behaviors, our exercise behaviors.
Yeah. You didn't adopt this because you were flawed, right? That's a really important truth to come to. This wasn't because of an inherent flaw. Shame tells us that, but this didn't get designed because there was inherently something flawed about you or me or the other people who are here. That's not how it came about. We became susceptible because our vulnerabilities, which we might call our flaws, but those vulnerabilities weren't something other people could be with us with. And
Right.
so they felt more raw and more sensitive.
Mhm.
Mhm. And so healing is really much more than just getting our food and exercise routines kind of organized. There is a baseline for that. Like, are we hydrating? Do we spend time in nature? What is our sleep hygiene? Are we getting enough nourishment? Do we have enough movement in our day? Do we experience our emotions? Do we have a daily time for laughing, crying, sweating? Do we recognize the basic biological functions and honor them? There's a baseline for that for our recovery and our healing for sure. But there's a lot more in recovery with the emotions and our inner sense of self. It goes very deep.
Absolutely. You know that's I'm on board with my own journey around that.
I see it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up here for this afternoon, but I want to thank you so much for the, especially for you, Lynn, to give your vocal contribution. It's really helpful for others who may not be able to be here with us, but will hear the conversation after. And those of you who are chatting in the chat, I also appreciate seeing that there. And I love when the emojis come in. Thank you. Not too good at those emojis in the chat just yet, but I like getting them. So thank you for that. And what I'll do is I'll post this to our YouTube channel, and then you can hear it again. You can see it and hear it again, and keep reflecting on, we don't want to be owned by those industries or those mentalities. And if we are kind of owned by that, if our tether is hooked up there, it's going to prevent us from knowing our internal wisdom, the inner guidance, not the external reflection, but the inner guidance is going to be less available if we're sort of tethered to all of that that's pulling us not to trust ourselves. So may we each of us who has been here, may we find that inner trust and confidence today. And may that be available to women everywhere, really. Women everywhere. And people everywhere. Let's include them all. So, thank you very much for being here and for sharing your time and your vitality and your experiences.
Yes, thank you, Sarah Joy.
You're welcome. Yeah. Enjoy your afternoon.